Mom abandoned me at the airport at 15, just to enjoy a luxurious vacation with her new husband. Then, my name is Cora Ellis, and I was 15 when my mother left me alone at gate 19. The boarding announcement for a flight to Rome echoed over the speakers, a cheerful, automated voice detailing a life I was no longer a part of. She stood in front of me, her face a mask of strained patience, and pressed a crisp $100 bill into my numb hand. "Get yourself a taxi home," she said, her voice as sterile as the polished airport floor. There was no hug, no "I love you," just a clinical dismissal. She turned away from me then, her shoulders straight, her posture perfect. Her new husband, Gregory, was waiting a few feet away with his 2 sons. He put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, a bright, effortless smile instantly appearing on her face. She laughed at something he said, a sound that was swallowed by the terminal's vast emptiness. That laugh was the cruelest part. It was the sound of her relief, the sound of her freedom from me. I stood there, rooted to the spot, a silent prayer screaming in my head, "Please look back. Just once, please." She never did. I watched her walk away, the sharp click of her red heels marking the final seconds of my childhood. Each step took her further into her new, shiny life, and left me further behind in the ruins of our old one. That single moment shattered every illusion I had about family, about a mother's love, and about what it meant to matter to someone. It was the day I learned I was disposable. But that day, the worst day of my life, also became the beginning of my truth. Being abandoned at that gate, alone and invisible in a crowd of strangers, was the catastrophic event that finally led me to the one person who had been searching for me all along, my father. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. Before the world was measured in square footage and the value of a person was judged by the brand of their watch, my universe was contained within the 4 walls of a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up. It was small and the floors creaked in a language only we understood. The radiator hissed in the winter, a comforting metallic sigh that meant we were warm. The whole place smelled faintly of my mom's lavender-scented cleaning spray and whatever was cooking in our neighbor's apartment downstairs, usually something with a lot of garlic. It wasn't a place you'd see in a magazine, but it was a fortress of our own making. It was home. My mom, Sarah, was the sun my small world orbited around. She worked the late shift at the Starlight Diner, a place that buzzed with a neon glow all night long. She'd come home when the sky was still a deep, inky blue, just before the first hints of dawn. I'd lie in my bed, which was in a little alcove off the living room, separated by a curtain of colorful beads that we'd bought at a street fair. I'd listen for the familiar sounds, the scrape of her key in the lock, the soft thud of her purse hitting the kitchen table, and the weary sigh she always let out as she kicked off her worn-out sneakers. That sigh was the sound of safety. It meant she was home. Some nights, the best nights, she'd part the beaded curtain, the plastic strands clacking softly together. "Cora, you awake?" she'd whisper, and her silhouette in the doorway was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I was always awake. We'd sit cross-legged on the lumpy floral sofa that had been a hand-me-down from my grandmother, the springs groaning in protest. She'd pour us both a bowl of cornflakes, a late-night treat, and we'd watch old black-and-white sitcoms on our small television. Her laughter wasn't loud. It was a soft, breathy sound, a private joy shared just between us in the quiet of the night. In those moments, with the flickering blue light dancing on our faces and the taste of sugary milk on my tongue, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of belonging. We didn't have money for vacations or new clothes, but we had this. We had our secret middle-of-the-night club. We had each other, and it was more than enough. It was everything. This fortress of 2 began to crumble when I was 8. The divorce wasn't a slow erosion. It was a detonation. It happened so fast I didn't have time to understand it. One night, my parents' bedroom door was closed, and I could hear the low, angry hum of their voices. The next morning, the hum had become a roar. The words were sharp and jagged, flying through the thin walls of our apartment. I huddled in my alcove, a pillow over my head, but I couldn't block them out. Words like failure, disappointment, another bill. My mother's voice was high and strained, a sound I'd never heard before, full of a ragged, tearing pain. My father's was a low rumble of frustration and defeat. The next day, a single brown suitcase stood by the front door. It was my dad's. He knelt in front of me, and the smell of his aftershave, a scent I associated with piggyback rides and safety, filled the air. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "I'll see you soon, Cora Bean," he said, his voice cracking on my nickname. He pulled me into a hug that felt desperate, like he was trying to memorize the feeling of holding me. I squeezed back, my face buried in his jacket, and whispered, "Promise?" He didn't answer. He just kissed the top of my head and walked out the door. The click of the lock turning behind him was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Soon was a lie. The days turned into a week. A week turned into a month. Mom got full custody, a term I didn't understand except that it meant Dad wasn't coming back. We moved to a new apartment, almost identical to the old one, but it felt different. It was haunted by the absence of his voice, his laugh, the sound of his heavy work boots by the door. For the first year, I was relentless. "When is Dad coming to visit?" I'd ask. "Did Dad call today?" Every time a car that looked like his drove down our street, my heart would leap into my throat. At first, Mom would offer vague, tired answers. "He's busy sorting things out, honey. He needs some space right now." But as time went on, her patience wore thin. The questions pained her. I could see it in the way her jaw would clench, the way her eyes would go distant and hard. He missed my 9th birthday. I waited all day by the phone. A big, colorful card arrived in the mail, with a goofy-looking dog on the front. Inside, in his familiar, blocky handwriting, it said, "Happy birthday to my Cora Bean. I love you to the moon and back. Love, Dad." I read the words 100 times. I slept with the card under my pillow for a month, until the corners were soft and frayed. But he never called. When I showed Mom the card, she glanced at it and gave me a tight, sad smile. "That's nice, honey," she said, before turning back to the dishes. "But words are cheap. He missed Christmas. He missed my 10th birthday." The empty space he left in our lives grew larger, colder, more permanent. My questions became quieter, then they stopped altogether. I learned that asking about him was like pressing on a bruise for my mom. One evening, I found an old photo album tucked away in her closet. I pulled it out and sat on the floor, flipping through the pages. There were pictures of the 3 of us at the beach, at a pumpkin patch, on my first day of school. In every photo, they were smiling. They looked happy. They looked like a family. I took the album to my mom. She was at the kitchen table, a mountain of bills spread out in front of her, her face etched with worry. I pointed to a picture of my dad holding me on his shoulders. I was laughing so hard my eyes were squeezed shut. "Why did he go?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why doesn't he love us anymore?" She looked up from the bills, and the exhaustion in her eyes was so profound it scared me. She pulled me onto her lap, wrapping her arms around me. She held my face between her hands, forcing me to look at her. Her expression was grim, resolute. "Listen to me, Cora," she said, her voice stripped of all softness. "Your father left. He walked out on us because this life, our life, wasn't enough for him. He didn't want the responsibility. He didn't care enough to fight. He didn't care enough to stay." She spoke the words with such conviction, such raw certainty, that they became my truth. It was a simple, brutal story, and I absorbed it completely. My father hadn't just left my mother. He had left me. He had made a choice. And his choice was a life without me in it. The ache in my chest settled into a permanent, dull throb. I closed the photo album and helped my mom put it in a box on the highest shelf of the closet. Out of sight, out of mind. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I stopped looking for his car on the street. I learned to build my world around the story she had told me. It was a story of abandonment, and we were the survivors. It was just me and Mom again, bound together by our shared wound, and I loved her all the more for it. She was the one who had stayed. Life with just my mom was predictable, a quiet rhythm of school days and her long work nights. Then, when I was 13, the rhythm was shattered by the arrival of Gregory Hale. He didn't just enter our lives, he descended upon them. I first heard his name when my mom came home from work one morning, not with her usual tired sigh, but with a strange, giddy energy. She'd served him coffee at the diner, she said. He was a real estate developer. He was charming. He'd left her a $100 tip on a $10 bill and his business card with a handwritten note asking her to dinner. Their first date felt like a betrayal of our quiet world. She spent an hour in the bathroom, something she never did, and emerged smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize instead of her usual scent of diner coffee and soap. She wore a new dress, and her face was flushed with an excitement that had nothing to do with me. When she came home that night, long after I was supposed to be asleep, I heard her humming as she moved around the apartment. It was a foreign, unsettling sound. Gregory was a force of nature. He was tall and broad, with a booming laugh that seemed too big for our small apartment. He wore tailored suits and a heavy gold watch that seemed to weigh down his entire wrist. He brought my mom flowers and expensive wine and spoke about a world of stock portfolios and international travel that was as alien to me as life on another planet. He called me kiddo and would pat me on the head. a gesture that was meant to be friendly but felt dismissive, like I was a dog he was acknowledging before getting to the real business of charming my mother. My mom was completely captivated. She began to change in small, incremental ways. She stopped wearing her comfortable sneakers and started wearing heels. She bought new makeup. She laughed louder, a bright, brittle sound that echoed Gregory's booming laugh. She was so desperate to be the kind of woman who belonged in his world, a world of rooftop parties and charity galas. I was happy that she was happy, but a cold knot of anxiety was permanently lodged in my stomach. I was losing her. The quiet, tired woman who shared cereal with me in the dark was being replaced by this polished, smiling stranger. 6 months after that first date, we moved into his mansion. The word still feels inadequate. It was less a house and more a monument to wealth, a sprawling structure of glass, steel, and white marble perched on a hill, looking down on the city below. The front doors were tall enough to drive a car through. Inside, the ceilings were impossibly high, and the silence was vast and unnerving. Our entire old apartment could have fit into the foyer. My new bedroom was 3 times the size of our old living room, with a walk-in closet and an ensuite bathroom. It had a huge window with a breathtaking view of the city lights. It was the kind of room any teenager would dream of. I hated it. It was impersonal, sterile, and cold. When I tried to put up my posters of bands and movie stars, my mom gently took them down. "Gregory likes to keep things minimalist, honey," she said, her voice apologetic. "It's a certain aesthetic." My life was now subject to an aesthetic I had no part in. The house was already occupied by Gregory's 2 sons, Brandon and Kyle. At 17 and 16, they were princes of this glass castle, and they made it clear I was a peasant who had wandered in by mistake. They were tall, athletic, and moved with the easy arrogance of boys who had never been told no. They attended a private school that cost more per year than my mom used to earn in a decade. Their cruelty wasn't loud or obvious. It was a campaign of quiet psychological warfare. They'd accidentally delete my homework from the family computer. They'd have their friends over to use the infinity pool without telling me, leaving me to walk out in my worn-out swimsuit to a crowd of sneering, perfect-looking strangers. They spoke in inside jokes and exchanged knowing smirks over my head at the dinner table. They mocked my public school, my clothes, the way I spoke. I was their new favorite toy, something to be poked and prodded for their amusement. I tried to talk to my mom, to tell her how isolated I felt, how the boys treated me. We were in her new, massive walk-in closet, a room lined with clothes I'd never seen her wear before. As I spoke, my voice trembling, she wasn't looking at me. She was organizing her new collection of designer handbags. "Cora, you're being overly sensitive," she said, her back to me. "They're just boys. They're teasing you. It's what brothers do. You just need to try harder to fit in." "They're not my brothers," I whispered. She finally turned, a flicker of sharp annoyance in her eyes. "Well, this is our family now, so you need to adapt. Gregory is giving us a life I could have only dreamed of. Don't ruin it by being difficult." The message was clear. My comfort was secondary to her new life. My feelings were an inconvenience. Family dinners became a nightly performance of my own invisibility. I would sit at one end of a dining table so long you could have landed a small plane on it, a silent witness to their lives. Gregory would hold court, talking about acquisitions and mergers. Brandon and Kyle would chime in with stories of lacrosse practice and their plans for college. My mom would hang on Gregory's every word, her face a perfect portrait of adoration. They were a closed circle, a perfect unit. I was a spectator. I would eat my perfectly cooked meal, prepared by a housekeeper I barely knew, and the food would taste like nothing. The loneliness was a physical presence, a cold weight in my stomach. One night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the silence too loud. I tiptoed down the long, dark hallway towards the master bedroom, drawn by the low murmur of voices. I pressed my ear to the heavy wood of the door, my heart pounding. It was my mom and Gregory. "She just mopes around the house all day," Gregory was saying, his voice laced with irritation. "It's bringing the mood down." "I know, darling. I'm sorry." My mom's voice was soft, placating. "I've talked to her. She's just having a hard time adjusting. She's not used to all of this." "Well, she needs to get used to it," he said, his tone final. "This is her life now." There was a pause, and then I heard my mom say the words that broke me. "She'll be fine. Cora just needs to grow up. I'll handle it." I stumbled back from the door, a wave of nausea washing over me. She wasn't my defender. She was his accomplice. She was apologizing for my sadness, for my existence. I was a problem she needed to handle. I crept back to my sterile, beautiful room and curled up in the massive, empty bed. I finally understood. I wasn't part of their new family. I was just a piece of her old life that she'd been forced to drag into her new one, an unwanted piece of baggage. And she was growing tired of carrying it. The bomb was dropped on a Tuesday night. We were all seated around the ridiculously long mahogany dining table. Gregory, at the head of the table, cleared his throat in that way he did, a signal that a proclamation was imminent. He looked around at his family, at my mom, at his 2 sons, and a self-satisfied smile spread across his face. "I've booked us a surprise for spring break," he announced, his voice booming in the cavernous room. 2 weeks. We're going to Italy." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Brandon and Kyle erupted in cheers, already arguing about whether they'd see a Ferrari factory or the Roman Colosseum first. My mother's face lit up with a kind of incandescent joy I hadn't seen in years, not since the days in our tiny apartment. She looked like a child on Christmas morning. She leaned over and gave Gregory a long, theatrical kiss. "Oh, Gregory, it's absolutely perfect. A dream come true." I sat silently, a small, fragile seed of hope beginning to sprout in the cold soil of my chest. Italy. I had posters of Venice and Florence taped to the inside of my closet door, hidden away from the house's aesthetic. I pictured us all there, maybe walking through an ancient city, the sunlight warming my face. Maybe this was it. Maybe, on foreign soil, away from this cold house, we could finally start to feel like a real family. Maybe the 4 of them would finally see me. That fragile hope was systematically dismantled over the next 2 weeks. The first crack appeared that weekend. My mom announced she was taking Brandon and Kyle shopping for proper resort wear. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book, and I waited for my invitation. It never came. "We'll be back in a few hours, honey," she called out as the 3 of them swept out of the front door, their laughter echoing in the foyer. I watched from the window as they piled into my mom's sleek new SUV and drove away. A perfect, happy trio. I spent the afternoon alone, the silence of the mansion pressing in on me. They returned laden with glossy shopping bags from stores I'd only seen in magazines. They spread their treasures on the massive kitchen island: linen shirts, designer swim trunks, leather sandals, sunglasses. It looked like a fashion shoot. Later that evening, I found my mom in her closet, humming as she arranged her new clothes. I hovered in the doorway, feeling small and awkward. "Looks like you guys found some good stuff," I said. "Isn't it all just divine?" She sighed, holding a silk scarf to her cheek. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. I was just wondering when we were going to go shopping for me. For the trip? She froze for a second, her hand still on the scarf. She didn't turn to look at me. She just stared at her own reflection in the full-length mirror. A tight, artificial smile played on her lips. "Oh, honey, don't worry about that. We'll pick something up for you." This was really for some specific things Gregory wanted us to have. Her tone was light, airy, but the underlying message was as heavy as lead. Then came the familiar sting. "Don't make everything about you, Cora. Just be happy for us." The warning signs became more blatant, impossible to ignore. Gregory would talk at dinner about the plans, always using the phrase, "the 5 of us," but his eyes would scan from my mom to Brandon to Kyle and back again, his gaze sliding right past me as if I were a ghost. One afternoon, I found the flight itineraries printed out on the desk in his home office. My hands trembled as I picked them up. 4 names. Hail Gregory. Hail Sarah. Hail Brandon. Hail Kyle. My name, Cora Ellis, was nowhere. I felt the air leave my lungs. It had to be a mistake. A typo. People make mistakes. I put the papers down exactly as I'd found them, my mind racing to find a logical explanation. Any explanation other than the one staring me in the face. I tried to corner my mom a few days later, my stomach churning with a mixture of fear and desperation. "I saw the flight itinerary," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name wasn't on it. Was that a mistake?" She was busy on her laptop booking a spa day for herself. She didn't even look up. "Oh, the travel agent is handling all of that. I'm sure it's fine. Don't be such a worrywart." She dismissed my terror with a wave of her hand, changing the subject to ask whether she should get a facial or a massage. The conversation was over. The final, undeniable confirmation came 3 nights before we were supposed to leave. I was woken up by a nightmare and padded downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was dark and still. As I got to the bottom of the grand staircase, I heard my mother's voice, a low whisper coming from the living room. She was on the phone. I froze in the shadows of the hallway, my blood turning to ice. No, I haven't told her yet. I will, she was saying, her voice laced with a strange mixture of guilt and annoyance. There was a pause. I know, but you don't understand what he's like. He thinks it's for the best. He says it's a crucial bonding experience for, the new family unit. She let out a sigh. Honestly, it might be easier this way. She's been so moody lately. A total teenager. Another pause, and her voice dropped even lower. So low I could barely hear it. She'll be fine. She's 15, not 5. She's mature enough to stay home alone. I'll leave her plenty of money and stock the fridge. It's just 2 weeks. I stood there in the darkness, my hand clamped over my mouth to keep from crying out. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the last of my foolish hope. She wasn't fighting for me. She was making excuses for leaving me. She was discussing the logistics of my abandonment. She called me moody. She called me a teenager, as if it were a disease. She was planning to leave me. I backed away silently, my body trembling uncontrollably. I felt my way back up the stairs and into my room, the beautiful, sterile room that had never felt like mine. I lay in bed, the sheets cold against my skin, and stared into the darkness. The words echoed in my head. She'll be fine. The next morning, my mom walked into my room with a blindingly cheerful smile on her face, as if the conversation I'd overheard had been nothing but a bad dream. She was holding a small, empty duffel bag. "Morning, sleepyhead," she chirped. She tossed the bag onto my bed. "Hey, could you do me a favor and pack a few things? A couple of outfits, your toothbrush, the essentials. Just in case." I stared at the bag, then up at her smiling, deceitful face. Just in case. The two most cruel words she could have possibly chosen. They were a lie, but they were also a test. A test to see if I would play along with her charade. A test to see if I would make it easy for her. A part of me wanted to scream, to throw the bag at her, to demand the truth. But another, smaller, more broken part of me, the part that still desperately wanted my mother's love, clung to those words. Just in case. Maybe it was a test for her too. Maybe if I was good and quiet and did as I was told, she would change her mind. At 15 years old, I still wanted to believe that love could win, so, with my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip the zipper, I packed the bag. I folded a pair of jeans, a sweatshirt, and the one nice dress I owned. Each item I placed inside felt like a prayer. A stupid, hopeless prayer. The drive to the airport was surreal. I sat in the back of Gregory's enormous black SUV, sandwiched between Brandon and Kyle, who were both engrossed in their phones. The air was thick with a forced cheerfulness that didn't include me. In the front, Gregory and my mom were talking animatedly about the villa they had rented in Tuscany. My mom's laughter was bright and frequent, a sound that felt like tiny shards of glass against my eardrums. I stared out the window, watching the familiar landscape of my city blur past, my small duffel bag a pathetic lump at my feet. My stomach was a tight, painful knot of dread. I was a prisoner on my way to my own execution. I rehearsed 100 different speeches in my head, 100 ways to confront them, but my throat was closed tight with fear. The airport terminal was a chaotic symphony of human emotion, tearful goodbyes, joyful reunions, the frantic energy of people rushing towards their destinations. We moved through the crowd like a separate species. Gregory strode ahead, a king in his domain, while Brandon and Kyle flanked him like princes. My mom walked beside me but a million miles away, her focus entirely on keeping up with her new husband. She pulled a cart with their sleek matching luggage. I trailed behind them, dragging my insignificant little bag, a forgotten footnote in their grand adventure. We arrived at the international check-in counter. This was it, the moment of truth. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Good morning," Gregory boomed at the airline agent, flashing a dazzling white smile. "Checking in 4 passengers for the flight to Rome. Hail party." 4. The word hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of my lungs. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a typo. It was the truth, stated boldly and without apology. I watched paralyzed as the agent tapped on her keyboard. Brandon shot me a look over his shoulder, a quick, triumphant smirk that said, "I told you so." Kyle just stared straight ahead, a smug smile playing on his lips. They had been waiting for this moment. This was the final, ultimate humiliation. The printer word, spitting out a neat stack of 4 boarding passes. My mom took them from the agent, fanning them out in her hand as if they were a winning poker hand. "Hail Gregory. Hail Sarah. Hail Brandon. Hail Kyle." My name, Cora Ellis, was a ghost. It didn't exist in their world. The last thread of my desperate hope snapped. My voice was thin and reedy, a stranger's voice. Mom, where's my boarding pass? My name isn't on there. My mother's cheerful facade finally completely crumbled. The smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold impatience. She grabbed my upper arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin, and yanked me away from the counter, out of earshot of Gregory and his sons. Her eyes, which used to look at me with such warmth, were now as hard and unforgiving as chips of ice. She didn't look at me. She looked through me. Cora, you are going to listen to me right now, she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. Plans have changed. Gregory feels it would be best for this to be a trip for just the family to bond. The family? The words tumbled out of my mouth, choked with disbelief. I'm your daughter. I am your family. A flash of raw anger crossed her face. Don't you dare be dramatic, she snapped, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself. You are not going to make a scene and ruin this. Gregory has spent a fortune on this vacation. This is important. You are 15 years old, not a helpless child. You are old enough to stay by yourself for 2 weeks. Every word was a calculated blow, designed to make me feel small, selfish, and unreasonable. She was turning it around, making this my fault. My pain was an inconvenience. My presence was a burden. She let go of my arm and reached into her expensive handbag. She pulled out a single crisp $100 bill. She held it out to me. I just stared at it, unable to comprehend. This was my consolation prize. This was what I was worth. Here, she said, her voice flat and devoid of all emotion. She had to take my limp hand and physically press the bill into my palm. My fingers wouldn't close around it. Take this. Get yourself a taxi and go home. Order a pizza, watch some movies. We will call you when we get back. She didn't hug me. She didn't say, I love you. She didn't even say, I'm sorry. There was no apology because in her mind, she had done nothing wrong. She had simply streamlined her life, cutting out the one piece that no longer fit. Then, she turned her back on me. She walked away. Just like that. She walked back to Gregory, a bright smile reappearing on her face as if she'd just concluded a tiresome business transaction. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She leaned her head against him, and they started walking toward the security gate, Brandon and Kyle falling into step behind them. A perfect family. I stood there, frozen in the middle of the bustling airport, the $100 bill still resting in my open palm. I watched them go. I watched my mother's back, the stylish cut of her new jacket, the confident click-clack-click of her red high-heeled shoes on the polished floor. Each click was a second of my old life dying. I prayed she would turn around. I begged her in my head to just look back one last time. Please, Mom, please look back. She never did. She disappeared with her new family into the sea of travelers, laughing at something Gregory said without a single backward glance. And I was left alone, a 15-year-old ghost haunting Gate 19, abandoned. For the sake of a luxurious vacation. For the first hour, I didn't move. I stood in the exact spot where she had left me, a statue of disbelief. The $100 bill was still in my hand, growing damp from the sweat of my palm. My duffel bag was on the floor beside me. People swirled around me, a river of humanity flowing towards gates, baggage claims, and loved ones. I was a rock in the middle of that river, unseen and unmoving. My mind was a blank white space. It refused to process what had just happened. She would be back. This was a test. A cruel, horrible test, but a test nonetheless. Any minute now, I would feel her hand on my shoulder. I would hear her voice saying, "Oh, Cora, I couldn't do it. Of course, you're coming with us." I fixed my eyes on the security checkpoint, waiting for her to reappear. The minutes stretched into an hour. The flight to Rome would be boarding soon. They would call her name. She would realize her mistake and come running back. The hope was a pathetic, flickering candle in the hurricane of my shock. I finally allowed myself to move, my legs stiff and unsteady. I found a row of hard plastic chairs near the gate, one of the few empty spots, and sank into one. I placed my bag on my lap and hugged it to my chest like a shield. I took out my phone. My hands were trembling so badly it took me 3 tries to unlock it. I clicked on her contact. Mom. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times, each ring a spike of anxiety in my chest. Then her voice, but not her real voice. The cheerful recorded version. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. I can't get to the phone right now, but leave a message." Beep, my throat was too tight to speak. I hung up. Maybe she didn't hear it. The airport was loud. I tried again. Ring, 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 voicemail. I tried a third time. Ring, ring. It went straight to voicemail. She had turned off her phone, or she had blocked my number. The thought was so monstrous I couldn't fully accept it. She wouldn't do that. She was just busy. She was getting on the plane. She would call me back when they landed. I switched to text messages. My thumbs hovered over the keypad, clumsy and useless. What could I even say? Where are you? You forgot me. Please come back. It all sounded so childish, so desperate. I settled on something simple. Mom, the plane is going to leave soon. Are you coming back? I hit send. I stared at the screen, at the little blue bubble with my words in it. I watched for the 3 little dots that would mean she was typing a reply. They never appeared. The message just sat there under the word delivered, a silent testament to my plea. The hours began to bleed into one another. The cheerful morning light that had streamed through the massive terminal windows slowly turned into the flat, gray light of the afternoon. Families came and went. I watched a father hoist his giggling toddler onto his shoulders. I watched a mother meticulously wipe her son's sticky hands with a wet wipe before handing him a cookie. I watched a teenage girl about my age, laughing with her parents as they looked at a map together, planning their adventure. Each happy family was a new, sharp stab of pain. They were living in a world I was no longer a part of. I was on the other side of some invisible wall, a ghost haunting their reality. My phone became my obsession. I checked it every 30 seconds, my thumb swiping down to refresh, praying for a notification, a sign that I hadn't been completely forgotten. Nothing. I scrolled back through our old text messages. Just last week, she had sent me a heart emoji after I told her I'd cleaned my room. 2 weeks ago, she'd texted, "Don't forget I love you." Had it all been a lie? Was it possible for a person to change so completely, so quickly? Or had this cold, cruel stranger been there all along, hiding behind the mask of my mother? My stomach began to ache, a hollow, cramping pain. I hadn't eaten since the small bowl of cereal I'd had for breakfast, a lifetime ago. I looked at the $100 bill in my hand. "Order yourself something nice," she'd said. The words were a bitter mockery. I couldn't bring myself to spend it. It felt like blood money. It was the payment she had made in exchange for her freedom from me. Spending it felt like accepting the terms of our transaction. The airport began to change as evening approached. The crowds thinned. The lights inside grew brighter as the sky outside darkened to a deep indigo. The announcements from the speakers sounded lonelier, echoing in the growing emptiness. The cleaning crews started to appear, their machines humming a mournful tune as they polished the floors. I was still in the same chair. My body ached. My eyes burned from staring at my phone screen. The hope had died hours ago, replaced by a cold, heavy certainty. She was gone. She was on a plane, thousands of feet in the air, flying further and further away from me with every passing minute. She was probably drinking champagne, laughing with Gregory, not giving me a second thought. The pain of it was so immense I felt like I was suffocating. I finally peeled myself from the chair, my limbs stiff and cold. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit here all night. I wandered aimlessly through the terminal, my duffel bag bumping against my leg. I found a quiet corner near a row of vending machines. My hunger was now a gnawing, insistent demand. I smoothed out the crumpled $100 bill. It felt wrong, but my body didn't care about the symbolism. I fed a few dollars into the machine and bought a stale-looking candy bar and a bottle of water. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, and ate the candy bar in 3 bites. It tasted like ash and sugar. The water was cold and soothing on my raw throat. I told myself I could survive this. I was 15. I was practically an adult. I could take a taxi home. I could stay by myself for 2 weeks. I would be fine. I would be strong. I would show her that I didn't need her. It was a fragile mantra of defiance, and I repeated it over and over in my head. I would survive. I would survive. I must have drifted off, my head lolling against the wall, because the next thing I knew, a gentle voice was cutting through my exhausted haze. "Miss? Sweetheart, are you okay?" I opened my eyes. A man was standing over me. He wore the uniform of an airport security guard. He was older, with kind, crinkly eyes and a gentle expression. He wasn't looking at me with suspicion, but with genuine concern. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked softly. That simple question. That one. Simple, kind question did what my mother's cruelty could not. It broke me. The dam of shock and forced bravado I had constructed all day shattered into a million pieces. A sob tore its way out of my chest, a raw, ragged sound that shocked me with its intensity. The tears I had been holding back for hours began to stream down my face, hot and unstoppable. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, my whole body trembling. Hey, it's all right," the guard said, his voice full of a gentle authority. He knelt down beside me. "Let's get you somewhere more comfortable. Can you walk?" I nodded, even though my legs felt like jelly. He helped me to my feet and picked up my duffel bag. He put a steadying hand on my shoulder and guided me through the quiet terminal, away from the vending machines and the cold floor. He led me to a brightly lit office with a sign that said, Customer Service. Inside, a woman with warm eyes and a name tag that read, Helen, looked up from her computer. The guard explained the situation in a low voice. Helen's face immediately softened with compassion. She came around the desk and led me to a chair. Here, honey, have a seat, she said. She handed me a box of tissues and a bottle of water. Just take a deep breath. You're safe now. I sat there for a long time, just crying, unable to form words. Helen and the guard, whose name was David, waited patiently. They didn't push me. They didn't rush me. They just created a small, safe space for me to fall apart in. When my sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, Helen pulled her chair closer. Can you tell me your name? She asked gently. Cora, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Okay, Cora, that's a beautiful name. Can you tell me what happened? I tried to explain. The words came out in a jumbled, broken mess. My mom, she left. The flight to Italy. She just left me here. Helen listened, her expression never changing from one of deep empathy. She didn't question me. She didn't doubt me. She simply nodded. I see, she said. Is there anyone we can call for you? Another family member? A friend? My mind went blank. All I could think of was my mom's smiling, treacherous face. Then another face surfaced, a ghost from a past I had been taught to forget, a face from an old photograph in a box on the highest shelf of a closet, a man with kind eyes holding me on his shoulders. My mother's words echoed in my head. He left us. He didn't care enough to stay. For years, that had been my gospel, but my mother had just left me at an airport. Her words were worthless. What if she had been lying about everything? It was a terrifying leap of faith, a desperate shot in the dark. I didn't even know if his number was the same, but I had nothing left to lose. I took a shaky breath. There is one person, I said, my voice barely audible. My dad. Saying his name out loud felt like breaking a sacred rule. For 7 years, my father had been a forbidden topic, a ghost we never mentioned. My mother had built a world for us where he was the villain, the one who had abandoned us, and I had lived inside that story without question. Now, sitting in a sterile airport office, stripped of everything I thought was true, his name was the only lifeline I could think to grab. Helen gave me a reassuring smile. Okay, Cora, do you have his number? My heart sank. Of course, I didn't have his number. My mother had made sure of that. Any trace of him had been scrubbed from our lives years ago. No, I whispered, a fresh wave of despair washing over me. I don't know it. That's all right, Helen said calmly, not missing a beat. What's his name? Daniel Ellis, I said. He should live in the city. Or he used to. Helen turned to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. David, the security guard, stood quietly by the door, a silent, comforting presence. I watched the screen, my heart pounding with a chaotic mix of terror and hope. What if she couldn't find him? What if she did and he didn't answer? Or worse, what if he answered and confirmed my mother's story? What if he heard my name and hung up, proving he never wanted me? Okay, Helen said after a few minutes of searching. I found a few Daniel Ellises. There's one with an address downtown, an architect. Does that sound right? I vaguely remembered my mom once mentioning, with a sneer, that my dad had arty ambitions. Maybe, I said, my voice trembling. Helen picked up the phone. I'm going to try this number, okay? She said, her eyes meeting mine. I'll explain the situation. I just nodded, unable to speak. I twisted the tissue in my hands into a shredded mess as she dialed. I heard the phone on her end begin to ring. It felt like my entire life depended on the next few moments. Hello? Helen said into the receiver, her voice professional but warm. Yes, my name is Helen, and I'm calling from the customer service desk at the international airport. I'm trying to reach a Mr. Daniel Ellis. This is him? Wonderful. Sir, I have a young woman here with me. Her name is Cora Ellis. She paused, listening. I held my breath. I watched Helen's face for any sign, any clue as to what he was saying. Her expression softened even more. Yes, sir, she continued. She's safe. She's right here with me. Yes, of course. We're at the main terminal, customer service office, right next to gate 15. Okay, we'll see you soon. She hung up the phone and turned to me, her eyes shining. He's on his way, Cora, she said gently. He said not to move. He'll be here as fast as he can. Relief washed over me so powerfully my body went limp. He was coming. He didn't hang up. He was coming for me. The tears started again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of a fragile, terrifying hope. The next hour was the longest of my life. Helen made me a cup of hot tea, and David brought me a blanket from a supply closet. They sat with me, making quiet small talk about a TV show they both liked, creating a bubble of normalcy around me while my world was still tilting on its axis. Every time the office door opened, my head would snap up. My nerves were stretched so thin they felt like they were about to snap. And then I saw him. He wasn't standing in the doorway. He was striding through the terminal, his eyes scanning the area with a frantic urgency. He was older than I remembered from the photographs, his dark hair now streaked with gray at the temples. He was wearing a navy suit, the tie slightly loosened, as if he had run straight from his office. But his eyes, they were the same kind, gentle eyes that I remembered looking up at as a little girl. Our eyes met across the terminal. The world seemed to slow down. His frantic searching stopped. He froze for a second, his face a mixture of shock, recognition, and a pain so deep it took my breath away. "Cora?" he said, his voice a choked whisper that somehow carried across the space between us. I was out of my chair before I even realized I was moving. I ran past the desk, past Helen and David, out into the open terminal. He met me halfway, dropping the briefcase he was carrying with a loud thud. He opened his arms and I crashed into him. The moment his arms wrapped around me, the last of my strength gave out. I buried my face in his chest and sobbed, all the fear and loneliness and betrayal of the last 12 hours pouring out of me. He held me tight, one hand stroking my hair, the other pressed firmly against my back, holding me together. He smelled of aftershave and something else, something clean and safe that felt like home. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just held me while I cried, his body shielding me from the rest of the world. It was the first time I had felt safe all day. It was the first time I had felt safe in years. "I've got you," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you, Cora Bean. You're okay." He hadn't forgotten my nickname. After I had no more tears left to cry, he gently led me back to the office to thank a smiling Helen and a relieved-looking David. He tried to offer them money, but they refused. "Just take care of your girl," David said, patting my dad on the shoulder. The walk to his car in the parking garage was quiet. He kept a protective arm around my shoulders the entire way. His car wasn't flashy like Gregory's SUV. It was a comfortable, slightly messy sedan that smelled like coffee. As soon as I buckled my seatbelt, the questions that had been swirling in my mind began to surface. He seemed to sense it. He turned to me, his face etched with a decade of pain and frustration. "Cora," he started, his voice heavy. "I know your mother probably told you things about me. Things that aren't true." I just looked at him, my heart aching. "I didn't leave you," he said, his voice breaking. "I would never, ever have left you. Your mother, after the divorce, she took you and she disappeared. She moved, changed her number, and I couldn't find you. I hired a private investigator. I sent letters to your grandparents, but they always came back. Every check I sent for child support was never cashed. Every birthday card, every Christmas present. She blocked me completely." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a small, frayed photograph. It was a picture of me, about 7 years old, with a missing front tooth and a bright, gap-toothed grin. "I've carried this with me every single day for 7 years, he said, his eyes welling up with tears. "I have been looking for you. I have been trying to find you for years, Cora." I stared at him, at the raw, undeniable truth in his eyes, at the old photograph of a little girl he had never forgotten. And for the first time since my world had cracked apart all those years ago, I believed someone truly meant it. The story my mother had so carefully constructed, the story that had defined my entire life, crumbled into dust. He hadn't left me. She had stolen me. The drive from the airport to my father's apartment felt like a journey between two different dimensions. We moved from the cold, impersonal world of Gregory's mansion and my mother's betrayal into a place that immediately felt real and warm. His apartment wasn't a mansion. It was a spacious, light-filled condo in an older building downtown with high ceilings and beautiful, worn hardwood floors. It was filled with books, stacks of them on tables, shelves overflowing with them. There were architectural drawings pinned to a large corkboard on one wall and a few vibrant, abstract paintings on the others. It was the home of a person who actually lived, who had interests and a history. It was messy in a comfortable, lived-in way that made me feel like I could finally breathe, but it was the photographs that made my throat tighten. On the mantelpiece above a brick fireplace, there were several silver frames. One was of my grandparents, his parents, smiling on a beach. Another was of him with some friends. And right in the center, there were 3 pictures of me. One was the gap-toothed photo from his wallet. Another was of me as a toddler, covered in spaghetti sauce. And the last one was a school picture from 2nd grade, the year before he disappeared. My hair was in pigtails, and I was giving the camera a slightly nervous smile. 7 years of my life were missing, but he had kept the evidence of my existence on display, not hidden away in a box. He hadn't erased me. He saw me looking at them. "I never put them away," he said softly. "I always hoped that one day you'd come home and see them." That night, we didn't talk much more about my mother. He seemed to understand that I was in shock, that I couldn't process any more life-altering revelations. He ordered pizza, and we ate it sitting on his comfortable leather sofa. He asked me about school, about my favorite subjects, what kind of music I liked. He was trying to get to know the 15-year-old stranger I had become, trying to bridge the 7-year chasm my mother had dug between us. It was awkward and stilted at first, but his kindness was so genuine, so patient, that I slowly started to open up. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was actually listening to me, that my thoughts and feelings actually mattered. The next morning, after I had slept for 12 hours in a cozy guest room that was filled with books, he told me he had something to show me. His expression was serious, pained. "I don't want to hurt you, Cora," he said, "but you deserve to know the whole truth. All of it." He led me to his home office, a small room lined with even more bookshelves. From the bottom of a filing cabinet, he pulled out a large, heavy cardboard box. He blew a layer of dust off the top and placed it on the desk between us. The word Cora was written on the side in thick black marker. "I kept everything," he said, his voice heavy, "just in case. In case I ever found you, I wanted you to have proof." He opened the box. It was a time capsule of a father's stolen love. It was filled with letters, cards, and legal documents, all meticulously organized by date. He started at the beginning, pulling out a stack of envelopes. They were addressed to me in his familiar blocky handwriting at our old apartment address. Each one was stamped with the same stark red words: "Return to sender, moved, no forwarding address. I wrote to you every week for the first year," he said quietly. "Then every month. I just wanted you to know I was thinking about you." He handed me one. It was a birthday card for my 10th birthday. Inside he had written, "Happy birthday, my Cora Bean. I hope you have a wonderful day. I miss you more than words can say. I think about you every single day. I love you to the moon and back, forever and always. Love, Dad." Tucked inside was a gift certificate to a bookstore, a gift I had never received, a sentiment I had never known. My hands trembled as I held the card. All those years I had thought he'd forgotten me. I had hardened my heart against him, believing he didn't care. The truth was, he had been trying to reach me, and my mother had been intercepting every attempt. She hadn't just left him. She had systematically erased him from my life, constructing a prison of lies around me. The box held more proof. He showed me bank statements, records of a trust fund he had set up for me the year of the divorce. He had been depositing money into it every month for 7 years. It was a substantial amount of money my mother had told me we never had, while she cried over bills at our kitchen table. He showed me copies of emails he had sent to her, pleading for visitation, for just a phone call with me. They were all unanswered. He even had a report from a private investigator he'd hired 2 years after the divorce, who had hit a dead end when my mom had apparently moved us out of state for a short period without a trace. The full scope of her deception was staggering. This wasn't just a bitter divorce. This was a calculated, cruel campaign of alienation. She had poisoned me against him. She had stolen my father from me, and she had stolen me from him. The image of her at the airport, her cold eyes and dismissive wave, clicked into place. It wasn't a sudden change. It was the final act of a long, drawn-out betrayal that had started 7 years earlier. The woman who had left me at gate 19 was the same woman who had stamped "Return to sender" on a father's love letters to his daughter. "Why?" I finally whispered, looking up from the mountain of evidence. "Why would she do this?" My dad sighed, a deep, weary sound. He looked older than his years. "Your mother, she loved me, but she also resented me. I was an architect just starting my own small firm. We didn't have a lot of money. I worked long hours. She wanted a different life, a more glamorous life. When we divorced, I think her anger and her pride just consumed her. In her mind, the easiest way to start over was to pretend I never existed. And to do that, she had to take you with her." He shook his head, a look of profound sorrow on his face. "She hurt you to punish me, and that's the part I can never forgive." 2 days later, we met with his family lawyer. Her name was Mrs. Davies, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with kind eyes. We sat in her quiet, professional office, and my dad laid out the whole story, showing her the contents of the box. She listened patiently, her expression growing more and more grim. When he was finished, she turned to me. "Cora," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "what your mother did isn't just morally wrong. Much of it is illegal. It's called custodial interference. The financial deception is a form of fraud. What she did at the airport constitutes child abandonment and emotional neglect. Hearing the cold legal terms for my mother's actions was strangely validating. My pain wasn't just me being dramatic, as she had so often called me. It was real. It had a name. It was a crime. Throughout it all, my dad never once spoke with bitterness or rage. His anger was a quiet, controlled fire, but his primary emotion was a deep, heart-wrenching sorrow. "I don't care about the money," he told Mrs. Davies. "I just care about the lost time. She stole 7 years of my daughter's life from me." Later that evening, back at his apartment as we were cleaning up after dinner, he stopped and looked at me, his eyes filled with an unbearable sadness. "I am so sorry." "Cora," he said, his voice thick. "I'm sorry you had to grow up thinking you weren't loved by your father. I'm sorry you had to believe that lie for so long." I walked over and hugged him, burying my face in his warm sweater. "It wasn't your fault," I said, the words feeling powerful and true. For me, that truth was everything. It didn't erase the years of loneliness or the pain of the abandonment at the airport, but it rearranged my past. It gave me back a piece of myself I never knew I had lost. It showed me that I hadn't been abandoned by my father. I had been protected, from a distance, by a love that my mother had tried and failed to extinguish. The first week I spent living with my dad was like learning to breathe a new kind of air. Life settled into a gentle, quiet rhythm that was the complete opposite of the tense, performative existence at Gregory's mansion. We ate breakfast together every morning at his small kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the window. He'd make coffee for himself and hot chocolate for me. We'd talk about nothing and everything. He'd tell me stories about his work, about the buildings he was designing, and he'd listen, really listen, when I told him about my day. He helped me with my algebra homework, something my mother had always claimed she was too busy for. These small, ordinary moments of parental care felt like extraordinary miracles to me. After a few days, the shock began to wear off, replaced by a slow-burning, righteous anger. The memories of my life with my mother and Gregory took on a sinister new light. Every time she had called me dramatic, every time she had dismissed my loneliness, every condescending look from Gregory, every sneer from his sons, I saw it all now for what it was. A system of emotional abuse designed to keep me small and silent. The cold, sterile mansion wasn't just a home I didn't fit into. It was the scene of a crime. Towards the end of the week, my dad and I were sitting on the sofa when he brought up the inevitable. "We need to go back to the house, Cora," he said gently. "You need to get your things. Your clothes, your school books, anything that's important to you." A knot of dread tightened in my stomach at the thought of re-entering that house. "I don't want to go back there," I whispered. "I know," he said, his voice full of understanding. "But you can't let them keep your life. And you won't be alone. I'll be with you every step of the way." And so, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, exactly 1 week after I had been left at the airport, we drove back to the house on the hill. My mother, Gregory, and his sons were still in Italy, blissfully unaware that their perfect, curated world was about to shatter. My dad had the keys he'd been given during the divorce proceedings, keys he had never used. As he unlocked the massive front door, it felt less like we were entering a home and more like we were executing a rescue mission. The house was just as I had left it, silent, cold, and imposing. The air was still and smelled of the lemon-scented polish the housekeeper used. But it felt different to me now. I wasn't an unwelcome guest anymore. I was a survivor, returning to reclaim what was mine. My dad's solid, comforting presence beside me made all the difference. He walked through the downstairs rooms, a grim expression on his face. He'd point to a ridiculously expensive painting or a piece of designer furniture. "I paid for half of this," he'd say quietly, not to me, but to himself. Another piece of the puzzle of my mother's financial deception clicking into place. We went upstairs to my room. It was exactly as I had left it. My bed neatly made, a book I'd been reading on my nightstand. It looked like the room of a girl who was coming back. Seeing it sent a chill down my spine. This time, I saw it not as my bedroom, but as my cage. A beautifully decorated, luxurious cage, but a cage nonetheless. My dad had brought several empty boxes from his car. "Okay," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Take only what you love. Take what matters. The rest is just stuff. We can buy you new stuff." The process of packing was a strange, cleansing ritual. I wasn't just packing my belongings. I was sorting through my past, deciding what was worth keeping. I left the expensive clothes my mother had bought me to try and make me fit into her new world hanging in the closet. I left the designer bedding and the minimalist lamp on the desk. They were part of a life that had never been mine, a costume for a role I had never wanted to play. Instead, I packed the things that held my history. My collection of worn-out paperback novels, my box of old photographs from before the divorce, a faded, soft quilt my grandmother had made me, a small chipped ceramic bird I had painted in a summer camp when I was 7. I packed my school books and my journals. As I filled the boxes, I felt like I was physically removing my mother's influence from my life, piece by piece. I was taking back my own story. When the boxes were full and stacked by the door, the room looked stark and empty, stripped of any personality. It was just a guest room now. The last thing I had to do was the most important. I sat down at the cold modern desk where I had spent so many lonely hours trying to do my homework. I took a piece of plain white stationery and a pen. I wanted to leave a message. I could have filled pages with my anger and pain. I could have listed every lie, every betrayal, every moment of neglect. But I realized that would be giving her too much of my energy, too much of my emotion. My dad had taught me in just 1 week that true strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, firm, and unshakable. So I wrote just a few lines. My hand was steady. The words came easily because they were the absolute truth. I didn't sign it with love. I didn't sign it at all. The message was clear enough. I folded the note once and placed it squarely in the middle of the neatly made bed, on the pillow where my head was supposed to have been sleeping. The note said, "You told me you were leaving for 2 weeks, but you really left me 7 years ago. You left me once at the courthouse, and you left me again at the airport. I will never forget it. You traded your daughter for luxury, and in the end, it cost you the only thing that ever truly mattered. I've gone home now, to a place where love isn't something you buy." Leaving that house for the last time felt like walking out of a prison into the sunlight. As my dad loaded the last box into his car, I took one final look at the glass and steel monstrosity. It looked like a mausoleum. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing but a profound sense of release. 2 days later, my phone, which had been silent for over a week, suddenly buzzed to life. It was a text from my mother. "We're home." "Where are you?" "Your room is empty." I stared at the message, my heart starting to pound. A few minutes later, another one came through. "Cora, this isn't funny. Call me right now, then another and another." They grew more frantic, more demanding. "Did your father do this?" "I'm calling the police." "Cora, please, let's talk." "You don't understand. How could you do this to me after everything I've done for you?" I read each message and I felt nothing. The power she had held over me for so long was gone. Her words were just the desperate buzzing of a fly trapped behind glass. My dad came and stood behind me, reading the messages over my shoulder. He put a comforting hand on my arm. "You don't have to answer," he said quietly. I looked at her final message, the one that tried to paint her as the victim. "How could you do this to me?" I thought about leaving her a note on a pillow. I thought about a $100 bill. I thought about gate 19. I turned my phone over, placing it face down on the table. The buzzing continued for a while, then finally stopped. I didn't reply. Because for the first time in my life, I understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Sometimes silence says everything. Years passed. The legal battle was messy and painful, but with the mountain of evidence my father had kept, the outcome was never in doubt. He gained full custody, and my mother's financial deceptions were laid bare. Gregory, faced with the undeniable proof of his wife's fraud and the scandal it would cause, divorced her almost immediately. Her luxurious world crumbled as quickly as it had been built. I didn't see her through most of it. My father and Mrs. Davies shielded me from the worst of it, allowing me to heal and build a new life, a real life. I finished high school living with my dad, making real friends, and discovering who I was without the constant weight of my mother's neglect. It wasn't always easy. There were scars, but for every bad memory, my dad helped me create a new, good one to take its place. Years later, I stood on a lawn in a borrowed cap and gown, my college diploma clutched in my hand. I scanned the crowd of smiling parents, and I found him easily. My dad was standing in the front row, his camera raised, a grin so wide it looked like it might split his face. When my name was called, he clapped louder and whistled more shrilly than anyone else. He was my rock, my champion, my home. As the ceremony ended and families began to merge on the grass, I saw her. My mother was standing by herself near an old oak tree at the edge of the crowd. She looked older, smaller. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by something ordinary. She saw me looking and took a hesitant step forward. She came once to apologize, to try and rewrite history one more time. "Cora," she said, her voice strained. "I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I was lost." I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, the woman who had abandoned me, and I felt not anger, but a distant, quiet pity. The old desperate need for her approval was gone. "I know," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I forgive you." A look of relief washed over her face. "Oh, Cora." "No," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "You need to understand. I'm forgiving you for me, not for you. I'm letting this go so it doesn't have a hold on me anymore. It doesn't mean I forget. It doesn't mean we can go back. What you did is a part of my story, but you don't get to be a part of my life. I have a family now." I looked over her shoulder to where my dad was waiting for me, his eyes full of love and pride. I walked away and didn't look back. If you've ever been left behind, if you've ever been made to feel like you weren't enough, remember this: your story isn't over. Being abandoned doesn't define your worth. It's a reflection of the person who left, not the person who was left behind. It's not an ending. It's a brutal, painful, and powerful beginning. It's the moment you get to choose your own family and build your own home. Being left at the airport was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it was also the beginning of finding my way home. Like, share, and subscribe if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from the pieces of someone else's betrayal. You are not alone.